Okay, hopefully this records. I just converted the 69 to 70 registrar data of foreign students. And since it was in cursive and handwritten, it was kind of complicated. So I thought I would make a video talking about how I did this. So this is the finished table that I've converted it to. And as I go along, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight things in green bold. So the first thing I did was copy down all of the countries. That was actually a little more complicated than it sounds because, like I said, this cursive is kind of hard to read. Most of these are okay, you know, Argentina, Australia, that says Austria. Some of them are a little more complicated. You know, that looks like it says China, but like she wrote it over a T or T, I don't know who wrote this. You know, fancy F, Finland. That took me a while. I'm pretty sure it's France because this is alphabetical, which is very helpful because, you know, it can't start with a K. So I'm assuming that's France. And then there's this over here where very beautifully she's written Indonesia, but with an SH. So lots of stuff like that. But I more or less got it all down. So after that, I noticed that she had parentheticals next to each country name. And I'm pretty sure those are the totals from each nation. So I went ahead and I copied those down here in total. So those are mostly pretty straightforward. One of the issues I ran into was here in Australia. It says there's 7, whereas over here she's written 6, even though that very much appears to be a 7. I recorded that as a 7 because it makes the numbers work. Additionally, there's like this one over here where it's a China, and it says, if you zoom way in on that, you can kind of tell it appears to say 17, but it looks like the record keeper has recorded that number over an erroneous number or something like that. So some of these are a little bit hard to read, but I put those down as best as I could. Following that, I copied down to the undergraduate men and women. That was also a little bit tricky just because some of these columns, you can see there are the columns undergraduate, what looks to say Fitzroy or something like that. I can't quite tell what that says. And then graduate, and then men are on the left, women are on the right of each of these. But you can see she doesn't include any column lines, which would indicate which column these are actually in. And they're very, you know, all over the place. So you kind of have to figure out where each one goes. So for at least the undergraduate column, it was pretty intuitive. You know, they're either to the left or to the right, and there are dashes. Sorry, there are numbers here summing up how many there are. There are, you know, a couple. So that makes it a little bit easier. Where I started running into trouble was where I have this, I still don't know what it says. It looks like it says Fitzroy. And then down here, it looks like it says regular. And this took me a while to figure out. But basically what I ended up figuring out was that these are all men, unless it says women. And there are only 2 women. There's a woman from Korea and a woman from Turkey. The rest of them are men, and it lists what school they're in. And they all seem to say either medical school, med, or divinity. And there's div. And I'll go down here and I'll find, let's look at the women from Korea. There's Korea, and it says 1 div woman. Additionally, some of these have multiple lines. You see Korea has 2 lines. That's because the record keeper wrote 1 div, which means 1 man in divinity school. And then below it, she wrote 1 divinity woman. So I actually haven't recorded which ones say med and which ones say divinity, but I'll probably add another column there. And then graduate men and women, you know, kind of a similar process. So once I had all of these written down, I went in and I added the sum column, which is right there. And you can see that the sum column here is the sum of columns D2 through I2. So that's this to this. That should be the sum of all of the people enrolled from that country for each country. So this is the listed one that the record keeper wrote down. For Argentina, that's 4. And this is the sum of how many I recorded. So for this one, that's 4. The one where I ran into trouble was Australia mainly, because that says 6 here. And obviously 6 and 7 are not the same. I ended up writing 7 because it just makes the numbers work. But I kind of had to finagle that one and play around with it to figure that out. So all of these should say the same thing at this point. Oh, China is different. I think China was a misrecording, because when you get down to China, it's just kind of odd. I think they miscounted something or something there. But the rest of them are all the same. So when I got down to the end and I felt like I'd gotten all of these to work horizontally, you know, all of the sums of people added up to the sums that were listed in parentheticals over here, more or less, I used her sums down here. So it looks like 25 men from the undergraduate, 5 women from undergraduate. So I wrote those here in the listed sums there. In the listed sums, these are the ones that she recorded. So then there's 142 men. Oh, sorry, where is that? Anyway, there's 143 graduate men, 29 graduate women, and then I don't really know what this 142 is. I don't recall putting that anywhere. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a 14 and a 2. That's what that is. So there's a 14 men and 2 women. So again, that's, you know, one of the tricky parts of reading through this is that it's not very well delineated. So even though that looks like 142, it is actually 14 and 2. So all of these are written down as what the record keeper recorded as being the totals. My sums, which I put here, and those are, you can see here, they're summed of each column, were not exactly the same as those. So I had to go through and refigure them out. That's when I figured out that even though some of these columns that we're not sure about the name were listed in the women column, or they appeared to be just in terms of how far left or right they were, they're actually by default men unless they're explicitly said to be women. So I moved some of those around until it evened out. And I did some of the same with graduate men and women, made sure that I copied everything correctly until these all matched. So now the math adds up. I can't guarantee that everything's correct, especially since there appear to be some errors in the document itself. But I think it's as good as I'm going to get it. So now I just have to figure out what this fit proy means.